Hey, everybody. Welcome on behalf of Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. And this morning, I'm pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Louise Lerner, Holocaust survivor from France. For those of you who have not been to our museum before, Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. And this memorial eventually became Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. These survivors who established our museum did so with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that our museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward their mission. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Louise Lerner, who will share her story with you. After Louise shares her story, you can type in questions and she'll answer as many as possible. Before the pandemic, Louise was one of our most frequent speakers at the museum, and she frequently participated in our educational programs and shared her story with visitors even once on a weekly basis. And now that we are at home, she is still participating virtually in sharing her story with students and all audiences. So Louise, I'm honored to welcome you to your first public Zoom talk for the museum. And we're so happy to have you with us this morning.
Glad to be able to do it. Yeah.
So you can start sharing your story.
Okay. As Michael said, my name is Louise Lerner. I was born in Paris, France in 1938, which was just 2 years before the start of the war. My parents came from Poland, Warsaw, and obviously they came in the last 1920s because that's my brother, who is 8 years older than me, and me, of course. And so that was 1938. And when the war started in 1940, I was just 2 years old. My father, who was still a Polish citizen, volunteered into the French army. And when the French army surrendered, he was for 5 years prisoner of war in Germany. But luckily, he was wearing the French uniform. He was part of the French army, and therefore he was just a prisoner of war. And although the German knew that he was Jewish, but nothing, thank God, nothing happened to him. So my mother, with my brother and myself, escaped from Paris and went south and ended up in Toulouse, which was at that time under the regime of Maréchal Pétain, who was a French general, but he was a collaborator with Hitler. It's luckily that we escaped from Paris, because I learned later on, when I came back to Paris, that the Germans did come to look for us. They knew that we were Jews, and they came for us. And it was in a famous event in Paris at the Veldiv, which is sporting facilities, where the Germans took all the Jews, and from there they deported them to the concentration camp and to elimination. So we were saved from that. So we were in Toulouse, as I say, which is a town in the south of France. And in the beginning, it was under the Maréchal Pétain regime, but Pétain resigned, and all France became under the regime of the Nazis. So I was young, of course. The one thing that I remember of that time is in 1943. As I said, the Germans were rounding up all the Jews. And I remember one evening of that day in 1943, when somehow we knew that the Germans were coming to pick us up. We were living in a compound, a poor compound, and there were units on the ground floor, and then at the end there was a stair and 2 units on an upper floor, and we were living in one of those units on the upper floor. And as I said, that evening, I remember sitting in the dark with my mother and my brother, with our packs done, ready to be picked up. And we were sitting there in silence and in the dark. It was late in the evening, sitting in the dark in silence, waiting for the Nazis to come and pick us up. Well, luckily, the Nazis came to the compound, checked all the units on the ground floor, and they didn't come to the upper floor. So after that, my mother called on the resistance, the French underground. And so my next memory was to be on a train going towards the border between France and Switzerland. Switzerland at that time had already accepted many refugees, many Jews escaping from the Nazis. And so, as I said, we were on the train. It was dark in the night, and we arrived the morning at, I think, the name Annemasse, which is on the border with Switzerland. And I remember as we come down, as we are in the station, usually you have to pass a guard going out of the station, the railway station. And luckily, again, the guard was not there, and we went through. So we went, that was the morning. So we went to her house, and on the evening, again, we went out, start walking towards the border with somebody from the resistance leading us. And as we arrived at the border, whoever was leading us swam on the water because it was the rule. The Swiss had made a rule that we should not arrive. Nobody should lead us. And so we were there, and of course, a soldier saw us, and it was German, but it was a Swiss German, luckily. And my mother had to insist that we were there. We came there alone, and that we were looking for refuge in Switzerland. After some deliberation, the soldier called his supervisor, and we were allowed then to come through. And we walked toward the station of the guards on the border. From there on, again, as I say, I was only 5 years old at that time, And so I don't remember. My next memory was to be in a hospital room. Obviously, I caught one of those contagious sicknesses of children, and I was in a hospital room and an isolation room. And I remember my next memory is to be in bed in front of the partition where there is glass on top. And I saw my mother coming to say goodbye to me. Of course, I didn't understand much what was happening, but as I say, I saw my mother saying goodbye. And so my next memory again was to be again on a train, obviously with somebody taking me there was, of course, in Switzerland, many people volunteered to, organization also volunteer to accept refugees. And so I was on my way to Locarno, where a wonderful couple, Ernesto and Bice Bernasconi, had obviously volunteered to take me in. And so I was with them, and I must say, I stayed with them for 4 years, and those were wonderful years. The best, actually, one of the best years of my life. They were, as I said, they had no children, so they became for me my mother and my father, because I did not remember my father. As I say, my father became a soldier at the start of the war. As I say, that was in Locarno, which is the Italian part of Switzerland. So I had to learn how to speak Italian. And as I say, I had a mother and my father and a family, grandparents, uncle, cousin. I must say, it was a wonderful time. I started going to school in Locarno, and I went to school. And as I say, I remember at one time my schoolmates were preparing to make their first communion. Of course, we were all Roman Catholics. And so I said, oh, I also want to to have my first communion. And they say no. They knew that I was Jewish, and they say no. When I am adult, when I grown up, it's up to me to whatever decision I make, but they would not allow me to convert. And I am very, I think that it's a wonderful part of them, very responsible and so on. And of course, when I was there, they were Roman Catholic, and every Sunday morning we went to Mass. And I went to Mass with them all the time I was there. And so, as I say, I was there. The war started in 1945, which was then 2 years that I was there. And my father was freed from prisoner camp and went back to France, to Paris. I think my mother rejoined him, of course, and also my brother. But because I was in such a wonderful family, I was well. And in France, my parents had to start from scratch again. And the times were hard. And so they asked this family to keep me, and they of course accepted. And so I stayed on for another 2 years. And as I said, the time that I spent in Locarno were very happy years for me. But unfortunately, I was a refugee, and the Red Cross had control over the refugees. And time came for me to leave. I had to go back to my real parents in Paris. It was a very hard, painful moment when I had to say goodbye to them. It was painful for them too, because we had a very loving relationship. And so I left and came back to Paris. Of course, when I didn't know, I had to know my father, because when he left, of course, I don't remember, and I was a baby. And they put me to school, and I had to learn how to speak French, because I, of course, had forgotten. Anyhow, I managed. As I say, I started going to school, and I had also a hard time because, of course, I hardly knew French, and when I remember once we had a grammar exam in class, and of course I had no clue as what to do. So I tried to copy for my the student next door, the next seat to me, and of course the teacher caught me and took me to the headmistress. But I was fortunate that she was a wonderful and very understanding person. And I got a lot of help to help me to be up to date with the studies. And somehow I managed. And again, 2 years after, in France, you have the opportunity. No, you have to make the choice whether to continue with the primary school until age 14, or to go to middle class, so secondary education. And so I chose to go to secondary school. And again, I had to sit an exam, and I passed. And then I started to go to secondary school in Paris. It was a wonderful experience. I managed, I made friends. And so I was going, as I was going to school, and my parents also, there was a Jewish organization for children. And so I used to go to school on weekdays, and then on Sunday I would go to my Jewish organization, and that's where I learned what it is to be Jewish. I didn't know. I had to learn. So that's how it was. As I say, I used to go to school during weekdays, and on weekend I would go to this organization. It was good, but on the other hand, I must say, looking back now, I see I didn't have the time to really spend with my parents, my real parents. And also, I must say, they never spoke and never shared memories of the family they left in Poland, what happened during the war, where they were, I don't know. It's now that I have the time to think back, I realize that, well, it's a loss that cannot be, there is nothing I can do, but I regret the fact that we didn't have the opportunity to speak and share memories. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to school, and in France, in general, it was the time of the Cold War, and a lot of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. And so my father was afraid that there will be a third world war. So he wanted to leave France. At that time, my mother had a sister who was living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was there, she had a family. And obviously my parents were in contact with her. So my parents made the whatever is needed to migrate to Argentina. And so, of course, they told me that at the last moment, we leave. I wasn't happy, but you know, there was nothing I could do. I was at that time 14 years old. And so I see myself going, we went by boat. So we went down to pick up, to go to the boat, to go to Argentina. It was a 2 weeks, 2 weeks travel at that time. And yeah, I had a good time. I remember learning how to dance because obviously every evening there was an orchestra and people would go, there was dancing. And that's where I learned how to dance as well. And so we arrived to Buenos Aires, to my aunt and uncle. And of course, we are in Buenos Aires and I have to learn how to speak Spanish. And as I say, I didn't have any certificate of where I was, at what stage I was in my school study. So there was, I had to pass an exam to show what level I was, that allow me then to register and start secondary school in Buenos Aires. And as I said, I learned how to speak Spanish, and there I go, going to school. And at the same time, also then in Buenos Aires, I became a member of the Jewish organization. And so over the weekends, I also would go to their activities. And you know, I learned how to be Jewish. In Argentina, there is a certain amount of anti-Semitism, and especially at one time, a famous German general who was responsible for the extermination camps, Adolf Eichmann. He also looked for refuge in Argentina. And so the Israeli Mossad, which is the secret service, knew about it. They came to Argentina and looked for him, found him, and managed to take him back they took him to Israel, to Jerusalem, where he was judged, of course, and hanged. And in Israel at that time, there was no death penalty. There was a special law made to allow that for Adolf Eichmann to find his death, which, of course, I fully agree that it was well deserved. So that was the situation and the atmosphere in Argentina. And as I say, I was a member of a Jewish Zionist organization. And so I decided that I didn't want to stay on in Argentina. And I made preparation to migrate to Israel. In Israel, I had an uncle. My parents, of course, he was the only surviving brother of my father. And he had been in Israel for a long time, well before the war. And of course, my parents were in touch with him. So when I decided that I was going to then migrate and go to live in Israel, I made the necessary preparation, and eventually I found myself on my way to Israel. So I reached my uncle, who was living in Tel Aviv. And of course, again, I am in Tel Aviv, I am in Israel, and I have to learn how to speak Hebrew. And so again, of course, there was some special courses, very intensive course, which I went to, and I learned the basics. And also, oh, I forgot to tell you. No, when I was in Argentina, of course, when I finished my secondary school, and I decided that I wanted to continue to university. In Argentina, luckily, university is free. There is no tuition to pay, and that's how I could go. I could do it, and so I chose to study architecture, and I started going to university in Buenos Aires. The course of architecture is 6 years. And when I decided to leave Argentina, I had completed my 4th year of university. So arriving in Israel, I applied at the University of Technology in Haifa, where architecture was a course, and I applied there to continue and finish my studies, which I was accepted. So as I say, when I was in Israel, I registered and started to complete my studies in architecture at the university, which is in Haifa. Actually, above a village above Haifa, it's called Neve Sha'anan. And so I went there to complete my studies. I managed again. I received always a lot of help. I was not the only immigrant, and of course my Hebrew was very basic. So, but luckily in architecture you make plans, and for plans you don't need to. They speak for themselves. You don't need to explain. But there are other subjects, and of course, I couldn't sit the exams in Hebrew, but I was not the only one immigrant there, and they allowed me to do my exam in Spanish. There was other Spanish people, students there. So between my exams and my everything, I completed my studies of architecture, and I was registered as an architect in Israel, of course. But while studying, I was living on campus, and of course the Israeli students were not living on campus. Usually on campus were only the foreign students. And that's where I met a student who was studying engineering from Jamaica. Now, how he was there is, at that time, Golda Meir, who was the minister, had organized a course of engineering from students. It was a parallel course in English speaking for students from developing countries. It was a parallel course to the to the normal course of the institute. And there were there, of course, students from Jamaica, from Guyana, from oh God, anyhow, from Asia, and so there was, you know, all foreign students, and living on campus while they were studying, of course. And that's how I met this student from Jamaica. We started a relationship, decided to get married. So that's why I then had to again leave Israel and go with him to Jamaica, because he, of course, he had to he finished his studies and had to go back to his country. And so I found myself on my way to Jamaica. So arriving in Jamaica, of course, in Jamaica, I speak English. I had a very basic knowledge of English because it was my foreign language when I was at secondary school, but it was very basic. But again, somehow I managed. And I look for work. So luckily, by chance, I met the minister for oh God, I'm sorry, I am a bit this morning. For the Minister for Infrastructure and Communication in Jamaica. And so I met him, and he invited me to apply to his office. And I did apply as an architect. I was accepted. And I started then working in the architectural section of the ministry. And so it was very nice. Of course, I was the first woman architect in that section, and the second woman in Jamaica. And so I worked. It was very interesting work. I enjoyed it. I never had any problem being a woman. Fortunately, I was accepted and respected. And so I stayed on for some years there. And then I left and I started my own practice. And so I was working in Jamaica as an architect. Again, in my marriage, I adopted a baby girl. I didn't have any children on my own, so we adopted a girl. And my marriage, unfortunately, didn't last, but I had a daughter. She lived with me. She went to school, primary school, secondary school. And then she decided that she wanted to become an interior designer. And in Jamaica, there is no school of interior design, no faculty. So she applied, and here in Los Angeles at UCLA, was accepted. So off she went to study in Los Angeles. She graduated. She met someone here and got married. She is now here. She is married. She has 2 children, a family. And when the time came for me that it was time to retire, I retired here with my daughter and my family. And that's my story. Okay. Hello.
Well, thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your story. We have so many comments from people who are listening, just thanking you so much for sharing this morning. And we do have some questions for you. First question is, how many languages do you speak today?
4. French, Spanish, Hebrew, and now English.
And what happened to your parents and brother afterwards?
Oh, okay. Well, as I said, all my family migrated to Argentina and to Buenos Aires, and that's where they stayed and died there. And they all died. They are all dead now. My brother died 2 years ago. My parents before, and they are buried in Buenos Aires. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that your parents never talked about their experiences. Do you remember them ever talking about their lives in Poland before the war?
Never, never. And this is what I lament now, that I have an opportunity. I speak about my life and I have opportunity to think and so on. I I lament, I am sorry, but no, they never spoke about the family that they left in Poland or what happened during the war, before the war, their experiences. No, we never shared that. And this is something that I regret very much. I I feel the loss of it.
You mentioned that your mother had a sister who lived in Argentina. Did you get to know her very well?
I got to know her, but not very well. As I said, we never, yes, at the beginning, that was our contact when we arrived in Buenos Aires. But as I said, we never sat and shared memories and experiences. It never happened. Not with my parents, not even with my aunt. No, I know nothing about them. And this, as I say, is something that I really feel the loss and I regret it very much.
Did you ever reconnect with the family that took you in?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was always in contact with them. As a matter of fact, before leaving France, I took a trip to Locarno to say goodbye to them. And yes, I was always in contact with them. Yeah.
Where did your mother and brother hide while you were with this family?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that my brother was with some convent with sisters, but my mother, I don't know. She never mentioned. I don't know. But as I say, it was the policy. The Red Cross, of course, was in charge of refugees, and so it was the policy of the Red Cross to separate, not to keep the families together. So each one was sent in a different direction. So I don't know. As I say, we never shared it.
When did you learn really what it meant to be Jewish? And I know this is a bit of a personal question if you're okay with this, but how has your understanding of your Jewish heritage changed over the years?
Well, it didn't change. I got to realize, first of all, as I said, nominally, I knew even in Switzerland that I was Jewish because I wanted to make my first communion and I was not allowed to do it. Then, when I came to Paris and my parents put me in contact with a Jewish organization for children, that's where I learned. I got contact with other Jews. Really, my realization of being Jewish really took time. It was evolving, because in the beginning, I really didn't understand what it is to be Jewish. I had to learn. And so I started to learn about history, about how the whole thing about the Bible, about Moses, about the Babylon and the Exodus and so on. And so I learned historically what happened. And then also that inside me, that acceptance to be Jewish, and evolving how to more and more, it's a greater acceptance of facts and feelings. It took a time until I reached this point of my life. But yeah, it evolved, it took time. And I learned it. I had to learn by myself. I mean, but being in a Jewish organization and so on. And here, even now that I am, well, even in Jamaica, there is a synagogue. There is a small Jewish congregation, because the Jews in Jamaica came from Spain more than 350 years ago with Cristobal Colon and so on. So I started going to services at the synagogue in Jamaica, and I go even here. And so, as I say, it has been a gradual conviction and feeling of being Jewish. And I am glad here, these opportunities that the museum is giving me to speak about my experiences makes it more and more for me that realization of my Jewishness.
Well, again, that's why we're so grateful to have you as part of our community. How long did you work in architecture, and how old were you when you stopped or when you retired?
Well, I only retired now 2.5 years ago, and I am now over 82. So well into my 70s, up to I was 79, I worked as an architect in Jamaica. Yeah. And I must say, I love my work. I enjoy doing it. But it came a moment when, work was getting scarce because of economic situation in Jamaica, and also because younger professionals came to the market, and so I had less work in my practice, and it came time to leave. But I did work until well into my 70s.
What kind of architecture did you do?
Well, really, mostly public buildings. I did some hospital wards, offices, and a few houses. Basically, a lot of offices that I did. And as I say, I did also some hospital, two or three hospital wards, you know, public buildings, not so much private buildings. Yeah.
Going back a little bit to your parents, do you remember what language they spoke to each other or to your mother's sister?
Sure, they spoke Yiddish. But they never taught me in Yiddish. So whenever they wanted to say something that I wouldn't understand, they spoke Yiddish. To me, they spoke French. So I can understand a little, of course, of Yiddish, but I don't speak it and I am not very fluent in it. Yeah. It's funny, but that's what it is. Yeah.
How has it been for you in the last 2 years living in Los Angeles, connecting with other Holocaust survivors when you weren't a part of a Holocaust survivor community in Jamaica for most
Yes.
of your life?
Oh, it's I wouldn't say it's a wonderful experience. It is a very deep experience to meet other people and to learn what their experiences, what they have been through. It is absolutely, and especially also some like that, some lectures through computer that I learn all what happened elsewhere in other countries, so other people. It's for me really a very deep experience. I am learning a lot, and I'm learning a lot of things that I still didn't know. So it is a deep experience. It's a deep experience.
Have you traveled back to France or Argentina as an adult?
As an adult, when I was in Jamaica, I went once to Paris, only once. No, I have not been to Argentina. Let me see. Yes, of course, I went to Argentina. I had my daughter. I twice. I know, maybe I don't know. Maybe only once with my daughter when she was still small. I did visit my parents in Buenos Aires. Yeah, yeah, I did. I had this opportunity to go to Argentina. Yeah, but it's just that um, it's also a matter of money. It's just not only they are not there any longer, and also it costs me it costs, and I don't have that financial situation to be able to do it. So here I am.
Somebody asked if you have photos of yourself and your family taken afterwards, and that's a good time because I wanted to show some of those photos.
Yeah.
So
yes, you have some, because luckily you have contact with Yad Vashem, where those photos of my family are. So it's wonderful that you have that contact. Yes.
So
that is me.
And Louise, when was this photo taken approximately?
It must have been in 1945. And as I say, I was 7 years old at that time. Yeah. And that's my brother. It's the first time I see that pictures. That's my brother. My brother was 8 years older than me. And yeah. Wow. Wonderful.
And I also want to share some photos of Louise's father's siblings who perished in the Holocaust. But
Yes.
one of Louise's cousins who lived in Israel submitted these photos to Yad Vashem. And
Yes.
Louise just saw these photos for the first time this week.
That's right. Yeah, wonderful. Yes. I don't know his name. I don't know who he was.
This is Chaim Yitzhak Lerner.
Okay. So he's the one who stayed in Poland and, of course, died there.
And this is Reuven Lerner.
Again, never saw him before. Again, he's the one who was in Poland, was in Warsaw.
And this is the last one we have. This is Carol Lerner, Louise's father's sister.
Again, I didn't even know her name. I knew that there was some family there, but as I say, because of course maybe she married and she didn't call herself Lerner anymore. I didn't know her. I didn't know that even she existed. I don't know. This is new for me. Yeah. I must say, in Israel, as I say, one of my father brothers was there. His name was Daniel, and he had a son. He had children. Miriam was his daughter from a first marriage, and then he had a second marriage, and his name was Avi, who is still alive and with whom I am in contact thanks to WhatsApp. I have a cousin in Israel with whom I am still in contact. And that's my only family connection.
Did your brother marry and have a family in Argentina?
Yes, yes. He married and he had two children, a boy and a girl. The boy, Ruben, eventually he got married and he migrated to Canada. And unfortunately, he had a brain tumor and he died a few years ago. I am not in touch with his wife or his family. And my daughter has a daughter, my brother had a daughter who also unfortunately was sick and she was bedridden from many, many years. Imagine, I have never asked whether she is still alive or dead. That sister, she was married. And luckily, actually, her husband has now a daughter living here in California. And I got in touch. So I got in touch somehow. I got in touch with him and his daughter. So I do have still a little family on the side that I, up to very recently, I didn't know I had. But unfortunately, my brother was very unfortunate in his children. Yeah. But my brother and his wife died in Buenos Aires.
So we again just have a lot of comments, people thanking you so much for sharing your story, and they really appreciate everything you have shared with us this morning, afternoon. And I think a nice question to end on, somebody had asked you, what is your most precious recommendation for us to take away from this talk today in your honor?
Talk to your family. Talk to your family. Be close to them. That's the most precious thing that we have is our family connection. So keep close to your family. That's all what I can say. And also, let's say, it's important also to feel Jewish and to be part of the Jewish community. That's also very important, especially because at this time and so many years from the last 2,000 years, there has been anti-Semitism in the world. And this is something that we must be conscious and fight it. So you have to be active as a Jew and as a family member, keep your family in touch. That's all what I can say.
Well, Louise, thank you so much. And of course, on behalf of the museum, I thank you so much for everything that you have done for us over the last 2 years since you've lived in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, Louise has been such an active member of our community, participating in just about all of our educational programs. And today, even though we're not able to be in the museum, you share your story on Zoom with students and audiences as well. Um, and I would like to remind everybody watching that while the museum is closed for the time being, we regularly have programs online. So please check our website and our Facebook page for updates. We hope to welcome everyone back to the museum when it's safe. But in the meantime, feel free to tune in anytime. We have survivor speakers every Thursday at 11 a.m. Next Thursday, we have Anne Signet, a Holocaust survivor from Italy. So we hope to see you then. And again, we thank you
I'll be
for
there.
watching, and thank you so much.
I'll be there to listen to her.
I'm glad.
Absolutely, yes.
Great.
Absolutely. And as I said, technology is a wonderful thing. And that's what allows us to be in touch, and it's really fantastic.
Well, thank you again so much, Louise, and thank you everyone for being with us this morning.